Know the name, you know the swoosh. It is absolutely everywhere, on the world's biggest athletes, on city streets, you name it. But this global empire, well, it didn't just appear out of thin air. It was built, piece by piece, from an idea so simple it's almost hard to believe. So let's get into it. Let's unpack the story of how Nike completely took over the world.
To really wrap your head around just how big this story is, you have to start right here, with this number. We're talking about almost $500 billion. That's what Nike is worth today. I mean, a figure that huge just cements their place as one of the greatest business stories ever told.
And really, empire is the perfect word for it. Because see, Nike isn't just a company that sells shoes and t-shirts. No way. It's a symbol, a cultural force that has literally shaped sports and fashion for decades.
But this is where the story gets really good. That $500 billion empire, it didn't start in some slick boardroom with a ton of investor cash. It started way, way smaller. It started with one guy, a car, and a trunk full of shoes.
So that's the big question, right? How in the world does that happen? How does a simple little side hustle grow into one of the most powerful brands on the entire planet? Well, the answer is both incredibly simple and totally genius.
So let's rewind the clock. We're in the 1960s, and our story starts with a man named Phil Knight. And believe me, he wasn't trying to build an empire. He was just a guy who saw a problem in the market and thought, hey, I think I can fix that.
You see, at the time, if you were a runner in America, your options were basically expensive German brands like Adidas. Nike had this amazing idea. What if he could import really high quality but way cheaper running shoes from Japan and sell them here in the US? It was just a simple, brilliant idea.
Now, of course, Knight knew he couldn't do it all by himself. So he teamed up with his old track coach, a guy named Bill Bowerman. And it turned out to be the perfect partnership. You had Knight, who was all business, sales, strategy, the numbers guy. And then you had Bowerman, the product guru, totally obsessed with performance and always tinkering to make shoes better.
And when I say they started small, I really, really mean it. Their first company wasn't even called Nike. It was called Blue Ribbon Sports. And its headquarters, its warehouse, and its storefront, all of it was crammed into the trunk of Phil Knight's car. Just think about that. No money, no big brand, just pure hustle.
Now, selling other people's shoes was a pretty good start. But the real game changer, that came when they decided, you know what? Let's stop being resellers. Let's create our own thing. And that one decision, well, it laid the foundation for everything we know today.
To do that, they needed an identity. So first up, a new name. They landed on Nike, after the Greek goddess of victory. Perfect, right? And next, they needed a logo, something that screamed movement and speed. And so the swoosh was born.
And the story of how they got that logo, oh man, it has become absolute business legend.
This is how much they paid a graphic design student to create it. $35. Just let that sink in for a second.
For $35, they bought a symbol that is now recognized in literally every corner of the world. You could honestly make the case that it was the single greatest investment in the history of marketing.
But look, a great name and a legendary logo, that doesn't build an empire by itself. Nike's real secret sauce was in what they decided to sell. And spoiler alert, it wasn't really shoes.
And this is so important. Nike figured out that people don't just buy a product. They buy what that product represents. While all their competitors were talking about, rubber soles and stitching, Nike was selling the idea of victory, the feeling of achieving your personal best. They were competing on a whole different level. They were competing on emotion.
And nothing shows this better than what they did with Michael Jordan. Back in 1984, they took a huge gamble on this rookie basketball player. But they didn't just give him a shoe deal. No. They built an entire brand, Air Jordan, around the man himself. They sold his story, his drive, his success. And all of a sudden, it wasn't just a shoe anymore. It was a cultural movement.
Okay, so behind all of that amazing marketing, there was an equally brilliant business decision that most people just completely overlook. It was like a secret engine that let them grow like crazy.
See, back then, every other shoe company thought you had to own your own factories. It was expensive, it was slow, but that was just how it was done. Nike took one look at that model and decided, nah, we're going to break the rules.
This is the key difference right here. While their competitors were sinking millions into building and running factories, Nike decided to outsource all of its production. That one decision was a revolution. It meant they could stop worrying about the headaches of making things and instead pour all of their time, all of their energy, and all of their money into the one thing that truly mattered: building the brand.
So when you start putting all these pieces together, A super smart way to enter the market, iconic branding, marketing that sold a feeling, and this revolutionary business model, what you get is the blueprint for an empire.
And if you take one thing away from this whole story, let it be this. For years, people have argued about whether Nike actually makes the best shoes. But you know what? In the end, it doesn't even matter. They won because they built the world's strongest, most powerful, and most desirable brand. Because when you buy a pair of Nikes, you're not really just buying leather and rubber. You're buying into a story. You're buying a piece of belief. You're buying a sliver of an identity. You're buying a taste of what it feels like to win.
And that kind of leaves us with one last thing to think about. In a world that is just flooded with products, Nike proved that the story is what really makes the difference. And it makes you wonder, what else in our lives is driven not by the thing itself, but by the story that we've all decided to buy into?